going back to the beginning of our conversation where we talked about trust between us and our client, that trust between buyer and seller is very similar. And if you lose the trust of a buyer, then you have no deal. But the best way to build that trust is to lay it all out there and tell them, this is the situation. And I think being vulnerable and being open is going to build more trust with that buyer right out of the gate. And you're going to be a lot more successful. And to your point, we don't want anything unexpected coming up after we've gotten signed LOI, because anything from there, you're not negotiating the price or the terms to be better. It's only going to get worse.
Welcome to the How to Buy or Sell a Business Successfully podcast. The concepts discussed in this podcast are for informational purposes only. No attorney-client relationship is intended or formed by this podcast. No legal advice is intended in the substance of this podcast. Feel free to check out our website, www.goforemanlaw.com. Enjoy the show and welcome your hosts, Jake Wayman and Sam Foreman.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to How to Buy and Sell a Business Successfully podcast. My name is Jake Wayman, joined by my co-host, Sam Foreman. We've been doing this for, I think this is episode number 31. And we're talking about, we have to find something fun that's going on in our lives. And so trying to think of different things that have happened. And right now, we've been in Snowmageddon for those that are not in the Midwest right now. And so we've been home a lot lately. And my 10-year-old bonus son has been really into board games. Clue and Monopoly are like the top two right now. And I've gotten beat in those games multiple times. And I'm just bad at board games, I guess. And so that's kind of what's fun right now, is just learning different things outside of playing video games. It's more of having them play some board games, like old school board games. So that's been a lot of fun. But I'm joined by my awesome co-host, as always, Sam Foreman.
Hey, I'm Sam Foreman, founder of Foreman Law. Our firm focuses on M&A and ownership transitions. The best part of my life right now is my wife got a new gaming system called the Nex. And it's all based on body movement. So there's no controls in order to play the games. You have to use your body, and there's a dance game in there. And I am almost as good as my wife at the dance game. And y'all, you have no idea what a emotionally significant achievement this is for me. My wife is actually a good dancer. I am, I don't know, seizures on the dance floor, basically. I'm not great, but yeah, that's pretty fun. Today, we're joined by Stephanie Siders, and we're really excited to have her here. She is an investment banker with CC Capital Advisors in Kansas City. They serve a lot of clients around the Midwest. Stephanie has roots here in the Wichita area in Kansas, and is just a great human being, really active in helping build community around the M&A and corporate growth space with some of her work with ACG. And Stephanie, why don't you tell us more about yourself and the work that you're doing?
Yeah. Hi. Thank you guys for having me. Really appreciate you inviting me to come on, and always love talking about M&A. So as Sam mentioned, I'm Stephanie Siders. I have been with CC Capital Advisors for just over 17 years now, which feels a little surreal to say because there's no way I could be that old. And we, as a firm, are an investment bank that primarily is working with family-owned, founder-owned businesses that are, for the most part, we're advising sell-side transactions. So usually it's a client that has built their company over decades. Maybe it's a third, fourth generation company, and it's kind of at the end of the family cycle, and they're ready to exit the company, or in some cases it's a matter of, they don't want to have the risk of being an owner anymore. Maybe they want to stay on, but they want to transfer a majority of that ownership. We do a little bit of corporate buy-side work as well, sometimes for family offices or private equity firms. But again, for the most part, that client base is also in the family-owned, founder-owned space. We like doing a little of both so that we can have our pulse on what's happening on both sides of the table, because I think that gives a good perspective. If we're representing a seller, we can put our buyer hat on and go, look, this is how we would look at it if we were on the other side of the table. And we find that can be valuable perspective. So the best thing that's happening for me, I would say on Sunday, as we were in the middle of Snowmageddon, we got about a foot of snow here in Kansas City. And our kids love snow. It was the first big snow of the season. They went outside on Sunday morning, and my husband and I looked at each other and I said, we made it. I don't have to go outside. They're old enough.
Oh,
we're
that's
just
great.
sending them out. And if they want to come in, they can come in. If they don't, Godspeed, kids. So
Oh, that's great.
I feel really good about that.
That's awesome. I'm looking forward to that season. I've got I'm still fielding questions about frostbite and things like that. So I think it's the winter equivalent of quicksand for little kids. Yeah. Is my nose going to fall off? No. Wear a scarf.
No.
Like
You're going to be fine.
I spent 20 minutes blowing up a sled that my almost 4-year-old literally only spent 5 minutes on it. And we were back in.
Yeah.
So
of course, that's the way it goes.
Yeah. 30 minutes to get dressed, 10 minutes outside, 15 minutes to unwrap everything.
It's kind of a good analogy.
And then you just have like clothes strewn about that are and puddles everywhere.
Yeah. Like we can't be bothered to like pick up the snow pants and hang them up. We're gonna leave them in a pile on the. Yeah. No, that's great. There's a good Jake observed. There's a good business metaphor in there somewhere. But so Stephanie, tell me a little bit about what it's like to work with an investment banker, especially for a business that, maybe it's a family-owned business. They're multi-generational. They may not have worked with a lot of professional advisors to that point. But I think a lot of folks may feel like, hey, investment banking, that's for somebody else. That's Wall Street type stuff. That's, something that just feels so foreign and inaccessible. And I've never gotten that vibe from your firm or other firms that we work with. And tell me more about what it's like to have that experience working with a firm like yours.
Sure. And to your point, a lot of times for our clients, it's the only time that they've been through any type of transaction. In some cases, maybe they've made an acquisition or two over the years, but for most of our clients, this is just completely new territory. And so they're coming in overwhelmed, kind of having no idea where to start. And our whole mantra for our firm is that we want to bring that Wall Street level advice, but we're bringing it to Main Street, Kansas City, or Main Street, Wichita, or Main Street, you name it, small town in Kansas or Missouri or Nebraska. And the idea that we're trying to convey is that you don't have to go to a big city to get high quality advice. We're right here. We have a breadth of experience, but we're also very approachable. We've done a lot of deals, but we are for the lower middle market. So we're not going to be advising, some big public company. We're not going to be advising a $500 million company. We are kind of the companies that maybe you've heard of, but you probably haven't. But they're kind of quietly in the community, just a nice, maybe slow growth, but have been around a long time, well run. That's who we like to work with. And I think kind of the deer in the headlights look that a lot of our clients have initially goes away pretty quickly when we, very methodically walk them through, here's the process, here's what we need from you, but we're going to take the reins and you're going to make the major decisions, but we're going to be with you the whole way. And so it's a very consultative approach that I think it gives them some comfort that, this isn't going to be, it may be overwhelming, but it's not going to be something that they have to go into feeling like, they're going to be taken advantage of, or that somebody smarter than them is going to get the better end of the deal.
Well, and kind of leaning into that, how do you, in your 17 years of experience working with, family-owned businesses? I was born and raised in a family business, and it's so personal to our lives. And, you're going to them and it's their life's work that you're getting engaged with. And how do you really break down that security bubble, if you will,
Mhm.
to them to know like, hey, like I can trust Stephanie. I can trust that she's going to have my, best interest in this transaction and help us through the process. I mean, how's your approach when you're doing that with family-owned businesses?
So I think it starts from how we connected with the company, and
Mhm.
that's why we have found the best way to make introduction with someone is to have someone that's within their trusted circle of whether it
Mhm.
be advisors or confidants, friends, that they make that connection with us. So we're not, somebody just off the street that, or, that they've found by doing a Google search. So having that warm lead or introduction is kind of the first step that we really prefer, where we have a certain level of trust right out of the gate because someone they trusts us enough to
Mhm.
make that introduction. So
Mhm.
that's kind of the first step. From there, we're very careful depending on their level of kind of consternation around the whole process. And we aren't going to push anybody to go faster than they want to go. We're not going to ask for every possible information that they have about their company right out of the gate. It may feel like that sometimes, but it's very much a kind of let's gauge where they're at and lead them along and not push them. So a big piece of what we find, especially with the family-owned business client base that we have, is a big piece of our job is to kind of counsel them. We're not just investment bankers at the end of the day. We are helping them make major decisions. We're breaking really tough news to them. We're maybe they're sharing things with us about their company that very few other people know. So it's important to kind of build on the human side right
Mhm.
out of the gate so that it's not simply a business type of arrangement. It by the time that we've kind of been working with someone for several months, it's very much a hand in hand type of approach where we've built that trust, and by the time we close a deal, we know a lot about them. They know a lot about us. We're very close by the time a deal
Mhm.
closes, because I think you have to build that type of relationship in order to be successful and to have them kind of relinquish the type of control that we need in order to be their advocate.
Yeah, no, that's great. One of the things that you and I have talked about a little bit before is the idea that the amount of value that a team can create, a team like yours in particular, is a lot of times closely related to how far in advance you can get started on the project. We as lawyers, we all the time get questions of or get approached by clients when they're at the deal table and they're not talking about getting ready for a process. It's like, hey, the process has already begun, and sometimes it's, hey, here's the signed engagement or here's the signed LOI. I'm like, oh, okay, all right. Well, that's how this is going to go, which is great. We're always happy to help with that. But tell me a little bit more about like, hey, what is an ideal timeline for you all to get involved with a business, and how does that affect the amount of value that you're able to create for someone?
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And more often than not, we're in a similar type of situation to what you just described, where maybe we have a referral source that says, hey, I have a client and they're ready to sell. That's great. To your point, we love to help people if they're ready to go, but even better news would be, hey, I have a client who is thinking that their timeline might be to sell in 2 to 3 years. can you meet with them, talk with them about their company, where they're at today, what might they be able to do in that 2 to 3 year period that will better position the company for a marketing process and for the entire process of doing a deal to go more smoothly. And the times that we have had that happen have been some of the most successful outcomes, I would say. I think of one specific example. I mean, this was a long time ago, but one of my colleagues and I met with a very fast growing company that was owned kind of 50-50 by two owners that knew, they were building this company to eventually sell. And they didn't know left from right when it came to doing a deal. So we started meeting with them, I want to say 3 or 4 years before they ended up pulling the trigger to go to market. And we were able to give them very practical advice around, hey, you kind of have a hole on your management team in this spot. You really need to focus on getting someone in that spot that, could really round out your team. Have you thought about doing this? Have you considered making any acquisitions? So, and then just regularly meeting with them, seeing how they're tracking, particularly from a financial standpoint, and really helping them kind of professionalize financials as well. And by the time they were ready to go to market, they were, it was a quick marketing process because they were ready. They knew exactly what they needed to do. The company was well positioned. And to this day, I mean, we closed 10 years ago. That was still one of the smoothest due diligence processes, marketing processes, and it was extremely successful in the outcome. And I think, those two owners today would still say that was a great deal. So if we had more business owners that were thinking strategically about timing and maybe just asking for help and asking for a third party to say, hey, you do deals. What can I do to really be ready when that time comes that I'm to the point where I want to sell? And unfortunately, that doesn't happen as often as we would like.
Yeah. That seems to be a common theme on a lot of our conversations is, having business owners that are open to feedback, taking it and actually taking action on it. And I think, that's such the value of an investment banker. And I'm not a huge fan of the term investment banker because people just feel like it's this weird feeling comes up, but it's like you're advisors. I mean, you are there to help them and walk through that process because you have the experience, you have the data, you have the information to know like, hey, this is how we need to prepare you for that potential, sell opportunity or what have you. And I think it's like, that's where you're able to provide that apples to apples comparison. And we've had past conversations about like perceived value versus enterprise value because, a business owner may think their company's worth, 10 times EBITDA. And it's like, really, but when it comes down to what the data says, it may be worth 4. But if you actually change these different things from what the information you provide, it could be 6. And I think people need to understand the value that advisors like an investment banker or a great transactional attorney can bring to the table to really help maximize the value and bring that there. And so, I mean, I'm not have a question. It's more of just a realization of, that's where you serve as really as that trusted advisor to walk them through and let them, really maximize the value of something that they've spent a lot of time, energy, sweat, blood, tears, everything into building.
Absolutely. And that trusted advisor is exactly how we refer to ourselves a lot of times. And I think the other piece of that, we have kind of a rubric that we look at when we're meeting with a prospective client. And so we can walk them through like, these are really, in our experience of selling hundreds of companies, these are the things that we know buyers are going to look at and what drives value. And if you're at the low end or, the far left side of this rubric for a lot of these categories, I'm sorry, but you may think you're worth, that 10 times, but you're not. But in looking at this, we can tell you these are kind of the levers that you can pull if you have the time and patience and the motivation to make some improvements. These are the things you can do in order to get to that 10x. And it's not like everything's just that simple, but we do know from being in the market and from talking to buyers on a consistent basis what's important and what drives value. And so just that awareness, I think, of how critical certain aspects of your business are, I think can be eye-opening right out of the gate.
Well, and there's so many lower middle market companies that, they get people knocking on the door all the time, whether it be a private equity firm, a competitor, or whatever, trying to acquire them. And they don't know that there's other people out there that can help them walk them through the process to maximize the value. They feel like, I've talked to so many accountants that have said, man, if I would have, had connected them with an investment banker or something like that to be able to do that, they would have, the price of the business would have been increased tenfold. But it's like, I think that's where it is companies that we're talking about that may not know about them, but they're these silently big companies that don't know what they don't know, and it's it's educating them more on that.
Stephanie, I want to get into a little bit more of some specifics here. When you think about like, hey, the companies that you all work with, or where it starts to make sense to work with an investment banker. I've talked to folks that will think that, hey, that's when I get to 100 million in revenue or something like that. And I don't think that that's the case at all. Where does it start to become, valuable for somebody to start having a conversation with an investment banker?
Sure. That can be a little bit tricky to, put a number on it. Our qualification initially anyway is, do we think there is a group of institutional buyers that would be interested in this? So for us, if the most likely buyer is Joe that lives down the street, probably not the right fit for us. That's more of, I would say, your traditional business broker type of transaction. But if we learn about a company and do a little bit research, and we learn that, hey, there are 25 private equity roll-ups in this space, or there are several strategics that have been kind of on a roll from an acquisition standpoint, that's where we believe we can be successful. If it's for whatever reason, occasionally we'll come across a company, we'll do that type of research, and it's just not something that buyers tend to be interested in. We're not seeing a lot of transactions in the space for, there's usually a reason. That may not be the right fit for us either, but we'll do, as small as say $1 million of EBITDA, if it kind of fits that criteria.
Right.
I would say our bread and butter is in the 2 to 10 million of EBITDA range. And I'm assuming most of your listeners, if they're listening to this podcast, they understand EBITDA, but really why we get so fixated on EBITDA and why buyers are so fixated on that. And it drives a lot of our clients absolutely bananas because they get sick of talking about EBITDA because they're like, my company's more than just EBITDA. But unfortunately, it is the best proxy for cash flow that it kind of levels the playing field that we have. So so that earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, and amortization is really just how much cash flow can we say that your business is throwing off. So it may be a 10 million business, a revenue business that is able to achieve 20% margins, and so we're able to look at it that way. Sometimes it's a very large company that has very low margins, but and that becomes a little bit trickier
Right.
to
Well, and
navigate.
I know there's a lot of small businesses out there that have aspirations for the big exit someday, or at least they'd like to have that as an option, that aren't in that, in that value range. And I think
Mhm.
that's where, some of this planning can come into play and be really, really powerful. As you might be, listening to this episode and thinking, well, gee, I'm only, 500 grand of EBITDA. Well, with the right planning and the right team and the right amount of time and commitment and God's good favor and send the rain, um, I mean, you can take the right steps to get to, where you've got a, $1 million, of EBITDA. You got $2 million. You got $5 million.
Mhm.
And some of it's just, taking the right steps, getting the right team in place. And,
Absolutely.
uh, give us some examples if you would. I mean, they don't have to be real specific or anything, but, when you've got a client that goes from, you mentioned that rubric earlier of, hey, here's the things that buyers look at, and they go, they take that right process and they go from, let's say, million in EBITDA to $5 million in EBITDA, uh, over time, and they improve, their sort of underlying metrics so that they're, not at the, bottom left end of the rubric, but they're at the top right end of the rubric.
Mhm.
What can that mean from a multiple perspective? So not just sale price, but when you're looking at, the lower end of that from a multiple perspective to shifting towards the higher end, how much can that multiple change?
It could change significantly if you're talking about that type of jump. And if you are, here, my assumption is one, you've done some operational improvements that have improved margins, but two, you're also growing the top line. So when you have kind of that double whammy of
Mm-hmm.
growing the overall size of the company while improving profitability, that's huge. And so you're making the company inherently more valuable just by creating more revenue, more earnings. You're gaining customers if you're growing, most likely. You're kind of checking all those boxes. At the same time, as you grow that EBITDA, the buyer universe explodes. So in that example where you have a company that goes from 1 million of EBITDA to 5 million of EBITDA, at the 1 million level, you're really looking at who are the private equity buyers that already have a company in this space,
Mm-hmm.
and would they be interested in the company as an add-on acquisition? So you're kind of limited to those buyers. Not completely. There's always gonna be some that maybe there's some strategic buyers that will look at smaller acquisitions. Maybe there's competitors that make sense, but in the universe of buyers, if you can hit that 5 million of EBITDA mark, not only are you an add-on you're still an add-on for a lot of those companies. Now you're a platform size.
Mm-hmm.
And if you can get to the platform size, you automatically are going to gain, I mean, I'm going to use round numbers, but at least a turn, maybe 2 turns of EBITDA.
Yeah.
Right.
So the
And
way private equity roll-ups work, for a platform investment, you got to be willing to pay up. So you're going to pay a higher multiple for the platform, and any subsequent add-on acquisitions, you're going to pay a lower multiple for, so that your overall investment into the company, as far as you've got this kind of whole roll up now, you're bringing your multiple down overall. And then you've got a much bigger company at the end that you can sell for an even larger multiple
Yeah.
than you paid for that platform. So if you can achieve platform levels of EBITDA, it's a game changer.
Jake and Sam here.
thank you for joining us. If you find this content helpful, please like, subscribe, share it with a friend, and especially leave us a 5-star review on Spotify or iTunes. Really helps us out a lot.
Yeah, 1 star, it's on Sam.
Yeah, it's definitely on me.
Yeah, and kind of for our listeners that don't, can you kind of describe what the difference between like a platform versus add-on or bolt-on, however you want to describe it, like the difference
Yep.
between the two?
Absolutely. So for the traditional approach for private equity firms these days, and this isn't across the board, some private equity firms, especially at the lower end of the scale, are that they're maybe more focused on just single acquisitions. But overall, the strategy that has been really successful, especially in the last 10 years, has been, let's go out. We've got a mandate. These are, this is the criteria we're looking for. Let's find a really good, decent sized or a large company that we can acquire, where in an industry where there's a lot of fragmentation, there's a lot of, we call them mom and pop type shops that we can go after. And after we get this initial platform acquisition, we can pull those small companies in as add-ons or bolt-on acquisitions and create a much larger entity. And in doing that, you've got this platform that's larger. It's probably more professionalized right out of the gate, but you can really make it what you want it to be. And then as you make those smaller acquisitions, it becomes part of that larger entity. And so you're able to get, a lot of efficiencies out of just having a bigger entity. And a lot of small companies simply don't have, either the buying power or maybe, overheads challenging. And if you're able to kind of pull them into this larger entity, then it makes the whole thing more efficient. But that platform initial investment is where the most time and attention is going to go from a due diligence standpoint, but also you're going to get the highest valuation because it's so important that they get that platform right.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and when you look deeper within the numbers, not every company that has the same level of EBITDA is going to be worth the same amount.
Absolutely.
I mean, you mentioned the rubric earlier of things that buyers are looking at. They're looking at the quality of the financials. They're looking at the quality of the team. They're looking at the quality of the long-term contracts that might be in place. One of the ways we talk about it with clients is, hey, you've got, seller's got a bucket and it's got all that value in it. How much of that's going to leak when you hand it over to the buyer? Because price is more about the value received than the value that's given up. And I mean, when folks work with a good team in advance, just like the example you shared a few minutes ago about, you've got somebody that started early enough in the process and was able to help, move all of those, all of those internal measures as well as, the top end numbers, to a higher place. I mean, that makes a big difference. And that's something that I imagine, based on the direct costs that they have in that process, pays for itself many times over. I mean, the math is pretty easy and straightforward. If you go from, without even changing the EBITDA number, if you go from, 5.5 to 6 on something, I mean, you're making a lot more money on something just in that process. And so, but for a lot of folks, it starts with education. I mean, they got to know what's going on. They got to have experienced advisors that are going to be able to help them understand the process so that they can make great decisions based on the outcomes that they're trying to achieve.
Well, that's something too that we've talked about in past conversations, and it's kind of alludes to here is, how you build or run your business will result in how it's valued. And so like in the value creation side of it, I think that's where you all come alongside them and saying, hey, if you pull these different levers, the value can change. You can go from a bolt-on to a platform or what have you. And I think it's so much like, I don't know if you've read Brent Bashor's book, The Messy Marketplace. And
I haven't read it, but I'm familiar.
Yeah. And so his book really, it's a lot of it's been in about the due diligence process, and how much I think having a good advisor next with you, advisory team in that process, because a lot of deals die in due diligence or the value of it. So they start with, hey, this is where we think the enterprise value is, but after due diligence, it dwindles down to like this little number because of some key things of how you ran your business. And so I think it goes back to the value of having trusted advisors alongside you that you can work with. And it may take 2 to 3 years because a lot of it's in the power of the waiting, working while you're waiting because the market may not be ready yet.
Absolutely. And I think to go along with that, what a lot of business owners tend to be short-sighted on that topic And what they don't understand is sometimes in order to create that value, you're going to have to spend some money.
Mm-hmm.
So depending on where the challenges lie within the company, say it's your accounting is a bit messy,
Mm-hmm.
and you've had the same bookkeeper for 30 years and they've done an okay job, but they don't really keep up with new accounting standards.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of a hobby business, and we can very quickly review their numbers and go, okay, well, you're going to need to get someone more sophisticated in here. And this isn't something, yes, it's going to cost money, but this is not optional. You cannot take this company as it is to market, because the first thing that any buyer is going to look at is your financials. And if they can't trust the numbers, they're not interested.
Mm-hmm.
And I think going into due diligence, the one thing that we really try to stress is there is nothing you can hide. I don't care if you think it is your best kept secret. It will be found during the due diligence process. And the later it is found, the more detrimental it is to the process. So we're going to need you to fill us in on every skeleton.
Yeah.
And not that every company has skeletons. And a lot of times,
no, they do.
For our clients, they don't know it's a skeleton, or they don't know that something should have been done a little bit differently, or that there's a better way to do something until we dig in and start asking questions. And then things really come to light. Well, and so the more we can dig in kind of as early as possible in order to get in front of it, the better, because gosh, there's nothing that it's harder on a business owner than having a deal called off in the 11th hour because something that could have been prevented.
No, I mean, I think you're spot on that. And I think, I mean, something we're constantly running into and trying to do a better job of is, I mean, something like that ultimately comes down to the human element.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
I mean, people's businesses are very personal. I mean, especially in the small business and lower middle market segments. And I mean, a lot of people feel like, hey, I'm being scrutinized, I'm being grilled here. All of my life is being put on display, and I'm insecure about it. I'm embarrassed about it, and maybe I'm ashamed about it, whatever that is. And something we're trying to get better at is helping, whether it's our clients or whether it's us communicating with the other side, is that there's nothing to be ashamed or embarrassed about here. I mean, I've never worked on a deal with a perfect business. I mean, every business has stuff. Like, nobody's surprised, nobody's embarrassed or shocked about it when they find out that, oh, you didn't, handle this properly, or you didn't handle that properly. But just as you pointed out, if that information is withheld during the process, or if it's not understood by your team early enough to be, for something constructive to be done with it, then it starts to damage trust. And I mean, for a lot of deals, trust is the currency that ultimately gets the deal done. And as soon as you don't have enough, I mean, your deal's not happening. They can't trust your numbers. That's one thing. I mean, you can, if there's enough value there, a lot of people can get to where they do enough work in the process to, trust their own understanding of the numbers. But if you don't trust the seller, or you don't trust the buyer, I mean, there's not a deal there.
Absolutely. That is the minute that trust on either side starts to diminish, the deal is really over. And if the company's already been marketed and you're in due diligence when that happens, we're likely not just going to go back out to market because we already approached the right buyers. So now you got to sit on the sidelines and wait for a while until one, you get everything cleaned up, but two, we got, enough time has to pass that somebody believes that.
Well, go ahead, Sam.
Real quickly, and then I want to get to your comment there, but it's like the best time to deal with those skeletons is, a couple of years in advance, because you can do a lot of cleanup. And nobody expects you to be perfect forever.
Absolutely.
But if you do some cleanup, I mean, you can put enough time between you and whatever it was to, get a buyer to feel really good about how it's been
Mhm.
handled and you get the right team in place. I mean, you could take care of a lot of
Yeah.
things that could have been obstacles.
Yep.
But if you're not in that position and you're starting a process, I mean, the next best time is just right now. And
Yeah.
all the cards on the table right up front. Hey, here's the thing. Here's how we're
Mhm.
planning to deal with it, or here's how we plan to set it up so that the buyer can deal with it in the way that
Mm-hmm.
they feel is best. But yeah, I'd be curious for your take on this, Stephanie. It seems like from a negotiating standpoint, the best way to put yourself in a good position on that item as a seller is to have it just right out in the open at the beginning when you're
Mm-hmm.
negotiating all those economic terms, because you get to say no still.
Absolutely.
Once the
And
buyer's made a deal based on,
mhm.
anything other than the complete knowledge of that point, I mean, they get to renegotiate now.
Yeah, that is spot on. And it, going back to the beginning of our conversation where we talked about trust with
Hmm.
between us and our client, that trust between buyer and seller is very similar. And if you
Hmm.
lose the trust of a buyer, then you have no deal. But the best way to build that trust is to lay it all out there
Mm-hmm.
and tell them, this is the situation. And that, and I think being vulnerable and being open is going to build
Yeah.
more trust with that buyer right out of the gate.
Yeah.
And you're going to be a lot more successful. And to your point, we don't want anything unexpected coming up after we've gotten signed LOI, because
Right.
anything from there, you're not negotiating the price or the terms to be better. It's only going to get
Yeah.
worse.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's
So,
usually no good surprises. Hey, guess what? I found an
no,
extra $500,000 of EBITDA.
Yeah.
Like,
right.
No.
But even
Yeah.
if you do, they're probably not going to pay more for it.
No.
yeah,
So you
Yeah.
have to make sure that you really are strategic about
right,
getting all the
right,
information that they
Yeah.
need,
yeah,
and negotiating as much as you can as far in
Mm-hmm.
advance as possible, and
yeah.
Yeah.
getting a good M&A attorney involved
Yeah.
as
Oh,
well
thank you.
to help
Yeah,
with legal
Yeah.
points.
yeah,
Well, and like it's a lot of these conversations we've been having. I mean, it goes back all about the power of community and having a good advisory board with you that they can be honest with you, and you
Mhm.
and also, but you as an entrepreneur. I mean, I'm a small business owner, and it's having that reflection of like, do I have humility? Do I have integrity? And am I humble enough to accept feedback from somebody that says, my baby may be ugly and I need to change these things? And
Mhm.
that's something that I try to do in my business is, I constantly ask, my mentors like, hey, this is what I'm dealing with. This is what's going on, and let them give me that hard feedback so I know I can reevaluate and change things. And because again, if you go to potential buyers and you mess something up again, you got to wait on the sidelines because you just kind of aired your dirty laundry to them when you probably should have been, cleaning it way before you even went to them. So
Yeah.
it just kind of goes back to that's what we kind of hear in a lot of our conversations, that power of community, and just also what are your values as an entrepreneur and everything too.
Yeah. And our first meeting with any potential client usually involves us telling them we're going to be very candid, and you may not like what we tell you,
Mm-hmm.
but we're not going to sugarcoat anything, because that's not going
yeah.
to help us or
Yeah.
Right,
you.
Yeah.
right. You can't make, good decisions with bad information. And I mean, if your
Exactly.
team's not going to be completely honest with you, even if it makes you and them uncomfortable, then you need to figure out how to get that relationship reset a little bit so that
Mm-hmm.
you're getting, as a business owner, you're getting good information so you can
Mhm.
make good decisions. Because if
Absolutely.
your advisors don't have enough experience, and they're not comfortable telling you they don't have enough experience or they're not aware of it, you really need to assess that as
Mm-hmm.
well. I mean, experience. I
Yep.
mean, for so many folks listening, they're gonna buy a business once or sell a business once. Maybe they'll do it a couple times, but for most people who are buyers or sellers, it's a one-time thing,
Mhm.
and it shouldn't be a one-time thing for your team.
Right. That's
Yeah.
100% correct.
You can't. I mean, there's just too much on the line for it, and we run into people who are on the other side of deals a lot of times, who are dealing with somebody that, well, I've dealt with this, this has been my team forever. That if that person really cares about you, and has the integrity that you expect of them, even if you choose to still work with them, that's fine. But make sure that they're being honest with you about, hey, here's my level of experience.
Mhm.
I'm really good at these things. I don't have a lot of experience at this. Doing a deal a year or,
Mhm.
maybe 2 or 3 deals a year is a lot different than, for example, working with somebody that, like a Stephanie level of experience that does this all the time, all
Mhm.
day, every day. I mean, that's just vastly different levels of service and value creation for folks. Um,
Yeah.
Stephanie, I wanted to hit on one other thing, and Jacob mentioned the community aspect. A lot of sellers get nervous about, well, gee, I don't know if I want to sell to private equity, or I don't know if I want to sell to an institutional buyer. I really like my employees. I really like my community. I like my customers. I like that, this is a thing that gives back to the place that's given so much to me. And I'm worried that a PE is going to come in and just kind of gut it and rip it out of the community, take the customer list, and kind of walk away. And um, there's sometimes that's true, but there's different kinds of PEs, there's different kinds of institutionals, or just different kinds of strategic buyers. When folks are concerned about that, how do you kind of coach them through sort of the options and the trade-offs?
Sure. We have those conversations, I would say more often than not. There is a very high level of skepticism around private equity as a buyer class, and for good reason. The first thing I would say is they are not all equal. Just like, people in general are all different. Every private equity firm has a little bit of a different focus, a different set of values. And so, yes, there are bad actors out there. And we have had bad experiences with a handful of private equity firms. That is why it is so important to really have an advisor that really digs in with the buyers and has in-depth conversations about why are they interested in this company, what do they bring to the table. If I say this all the time, but everybody's money is green. It's got to be something more than just the money.
Mm-hmm.
So
Right.
do they have experience that is going to be opening doors? Do they have an executive that built a similar company and they can, serve as an advisor and really help? Sometimes companies are like, I don't want somebody involved in my business, so is it a private equity firm that's more of in an advisor type of board role? Or some buyers are like, look, I'm tired. I just want to sell. Like, have them come in and run it. And so it's really evaluating the whole landscape of buyers
Hmm.
and providing options. And that's why
Right.
it's so important at the management presentation stage of a deal to sit across the table from a buyer and really get to know them and walk them through your facility and find out why it is that they do what they do. And then the next key that we always stress to our clients is you need to talk to other business owners that sold to them and
Hmm.
find out what is their experience dealing with this firm and why did they sell to them? Would they do it again? What advice do they have? And I don't think enough people take that step to really find out what kind of people they're dealing with. But at the end of the day, I would say for most of our clients that are based here in the Midwest, they tend to gravitate more towards the firms that are based here in the Midwest.
Mm-hmm.
Um, particularly those that are, I would say, I hate to stereotype, but Northeast or West Coast, we don't sell a lot of companies to private equity firms that are in those geographies
Mm-hmm.
because the culture is just off
Yeah.
and the values are off, and it's just not a good fit most of the time. But
Right.
I think it's surprising for a lot of our clients when we present them with some options that they find, a handful of private equity firms that they just really resonate with. And hopefully there's one, if not a strategic buyer, hopefully there's one private equity firm that they're like, these people get me. They understand my business. they didn't have to ask a bunch of dumb questions just to kind of scratch the surface on what we do. And that usually, once you get to that point, then the PE firms tend to build some trust, but it really is very dependent on the culture of the firm and then those people that attend the meetings, and is there a rapport between those. And I would say, to go to your community aspect of the question, I oftentimes have more fear around what could happen to a company with a strategic buyer, because there's more opportunity a lot of times for them to say, hey, say it's a manufacturing company, we've got a facility here. The best way that we could really make this deal work is to absorb your volume into ours and shut down your facility in Wichita, Kansas. So it's not that, unfortunately, they can happen with private equity. It can happen with strategics. That is something that you really have to try to, get to the bottom of in an in-person meeting, because you can usually tell based on the types of questions that they're asking and where the conversation goes, if this is going to be we're just in it for your customers, and your employees are going to be, without a job for 5 years. So that's why I think it's so important to have lots of options. The last thing that I want to see for a lot of companies is they sell to the first buyer that knocks on their door because they got a good offer, and it didn't even have an opportunity to see what else was out there. Because it's not just about the money. It's not just about the terms. It's about so much more than that. And for family-owned businesses, their employees are so important to them. And if they haven't found the right cultural fit from a buyer standpoint, then it could be a huge failure.
Well, I think you just nailed it. And I was going to say, I hate to keep beating this drum, but I don't. It's a really important and a really valuable drum. You hit it so well with options. I mean, when you give yourself options, you have the ability as a seller to be choosy. And so when you're well prepared, you've dealt with the skeletons, you put the cards on the table, you've got a good team that's helped you optimize your value so that you've got, lots of buyers that are like, oh, that's interesting, and in a good way. You have the ability to kind of listen to what people are saying and go like, hey, I think this is one that really aligns with my values. Especially if you're a family-owned business and multi-generational. I mean, I've got a lot of folks that are like, hey, I'd like to do a deal that my grandpa would be proud of. I mean, that's a cool conversation to be a part of. And when you give yourself options, I mean, you give yourself more chances to do things that really matter most. And like you said, Stephanie, that matter more than just the money. But you've got to be well prepared. You've got to have a good team there, and don't just take the first, good looking opportunity that walks through the door. Because if it looks good, that means that there's probably other opportunities out there. Don't get greedy, but don't get hasty.
And if that's a good offer, think of how much better it could be if there was a little bit of competition.
Well, I mean, that buyer could end up being, the first offer could end up being the ultimate buyer, but it's like, make them sharpen their pencil. I mean, you built a great company. Prove it. Go in and do that and create that optionality that's out there.
Well, and I would say, to your point, that they might be the ultimate buyer. We find it very interesting because a lot of times our clients will have kind of like, we think this is who's going to be the buyer. And, we've been talking to them. Almost never is that the buyer. We almost always find someone else there. They realize, actually, you know what? We like them better, or this offer is far superior. So that's what, again, it gets so frustrating if we find out someone didn't find out what their option.
Well, and I mean, again, for most folks, they're going to do this once. They're going to do this once, and you owe it to yourself to have a really good process that you feel really good about. I mean, no process is perfect, but good process tends to lead to good results. And you owe it to yourself, you owe it to your team and your family to feel like, man, I gave it my best shot. I did all the things that I knew to do. And then I've got the confidence of knowing, hey, this is where it landed. This is what the market told me, and that's great.
Yeah.
Rather than like, oh man, I wonder, you don't want to be stuck there second guessing yourself. And I mean, I'm not a big advocate of FOMO. I mean, life's too short for that. But, when you put yourself in a position to be successful, you just have more options to do that. So,
Yeah.
well, Stephanie, thank you so much for taking time to chat with us and with our listeners. Do you have any last words of wisdom or pieces of advice for folks that are thinking about, what their future as a business owner might look like, especially when it comes to, this broader idea of how do I create, maximum value in my business that puts me in a good position to succeed?
hmm I think my thought to leave on would be back to something that we've discussed several times in the last hour, is the idea of trusted advisors. And I don't just mean us, I mean, do you have wealth managers? Do you have an attorney? Do you have an accountant, a commercial banker? Do you have the right people around the table with you? And are you talking with them about what your plans and your future are? Because everybody has a little bit of a different experience, but they'll have different feedback. But I think it's so important to not just kind of be in a silo and think that your people that know you and your business aren't there to help with all kinds of aspects of your company, and make introductions where needed. So I think having those conversations again, as early as possible, but being thoughtful and strategic and deliberate about how to most successfully get from point A to point B. It's so important. And it is really important to kind of have that, even if you don't have a formal board of directors, to have a sort of mock board of directors that is there to advise you on their area of expertise, so that that you're doing everything you can to position your company for success.
No,
Absolutely.
that's great. That's great. Any last thoughts, Jake?
No, I mean, this is good stuff. I have a lot of more questions, but I know we're at time right now. But I mean, it's been awesome just to hear. It's just it's bringing the human aspect to investment banking, because people get very scared of that term. But people here in the Midwest need to know they have access to resources and advisors like this, and it really just goes back down to the power of community. And what kind of community are you building around you as a business owner?
Yeah.
But thank you so much for your time and for sharing so many great thoughts with our listeners here, Stephanie. And we'll look forward to catching up with you again soon.
Thanks,
All
Stephanie.
right. Thank you both.
Thanks.
Yep.
Thank you for joining us today. For future episodes, please subscribe to the podcast on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. And please check out our website at www.goforemanlaw.com/learning.